Beauty and sadness blend together when you perform for a live audience. It's such an electric exchange of energy, but you can't force it or hold on to it. These fleeting alchemical moments are what musicians live for on the road. They make all the unpredictability of pursuing a music career, the twists and turns, the long days, the hope and disappointments, worth it. Of course, you never know when these magical moments will occur. Could be any verse, any show.
Thanks for listening to Read Minnesota Books. I'm your host, Deborah Copperrood. Today's guest is Gaelynn Lea. She's a famous musician who has toured the world with her violin, looping pedals, and electric wheelchair. She got her start in Duluth, Minnesota, learning to play the violin in school orchestra. Hooray for public music education. As an adult, she taught violin lessons and played in fiddle groups and bands in Duluth. She formed the band Murder of Crows with Alan Sparhawk, the frontman of Low. In 2016, Gaelynn won National Public Radio's Tiny Desk Contest, which launched her career as a full-time touring musician. She has collaborated with Michael Stipe, the Decemberists, Wilco, and Pigface. She composed the original score for Macbeth on Broadway. In addition to her music, Gaelynn is a disability rights advocate and public speaker, and now book author. She's here to talk about It Wasn't Meant to Be Perfect, her new memoir about living with osteogenesis imperfecta, growing up with artistic parents in Duluth, having Alan Sparhawk as her gritty, tangle-haired music fairy godfather, having a Christmas wedding, and then hitting the big time, quitting her day job, and going on tour. And for indie music heads, there's at least one Neutral Milk Hotel Easter egg. Welcome, Gaelynn.
Oh, hi. Nice to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah.
Tell me, what is your connection to Minnesota?
Well, I was born and raised in Duluth, and I went away to college, but I didn't go that far. I went down to St. Paul for 3 years and then came back and eventually graduated from University of Minnesota Duluth. And I still live here, and I'm pretty sure I'm always going to live here, except for maybe if I'm lucky, someday I'll get out in March and April and go somewhere warm. But right now,
Mm,
I plan to be a Minnesotan for life.
wonderful. Tell me about It Wasn't Meant to Be Perfect.
It wasn't meant to be perfect as a memoir. I wrote it as kind of a behind the scenes music memoir, but just because of my disability, it's also a huge part of the story. They're kind of the two threads that weave throughout the book. And I wrote it partly because I just really like learning about a musical process of other artists. Like I find that really interesting. But most importantly, I wrote it because as a public speaker also, like that's one of the things I do on the side, I've noticed that a lot of the things I talked about from my own life experience at speeches and stuff, people said they hadn't heard before or thought about before, and I realized that there's a pretty big gap in our educational system when it comes to disability. And we're just not learning about it in schools. We're not talking about it in our culture as a whole. I mean, it's starting to change, I think, which is good, and it should. But I figured this would be kind of I call it a disability sneak attack. Like, hopefully, people will pick it up for whatever reason they feel drawn to it. But then, no matter what, by the end of the book, they should know a fair amount about disability history and disability rights and just what it's like to have a disability and hopefully expand their perspective. That was a very long answer. I apologize.
No, no, no apologies. That was great. And that is exactly my experience. I wanted to read your book because I knew about your work as a musician. And then I ended up learning. I have a question about the ADA that we're going to get to. So yeah, I got the sneak attack was very effective on me.
Yay. Okay, good. That's what I hope. It's kind of funny that it's not quite out in the world yet. So it's curious to see if that will be a success, but that's what I was going for. So I'm glad to hear it worked on you.
Yeah. So I was highlighting basically everything you wrote about music in one chapter. You wrote, music is a sacred expression of play and creativity. Music is for everyone. Music is a fundamental tool for human expression. Can you talk a little bit about how you arrived at your philosophy of music?
Yeah. Well, there's a few different things, I guess. One of them is when I did start getting more involved in the fiddle music world as opposed to the classical world, because I mean, I wasn't like professional or anything, but I did classical music all the way through high school, and the energy there very much is focused on like performance and perfection and mastery, and those are the big goals. And that, not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but it's certainly, I didn't realize until I got into fiddling, it's definitely not the only way to approach music. And so when it became more of a communal experience, I started recognizing that it had a lot bigger value than I had maybe understood before. And then and then, I started teaching fiddle lessons, and a few of my fiddle students were adults that really didn't intend to perform for anyone at any point. They were just doing it for themselves, and they got a lot out of it. And then I guess, just the idea that like you go to a family concert and you see little babies rocking out and stuff. Like, I mean, this is real. Music is such a big part of our expression. And another thing that didn't make it into the book, but like when my grandfather was dying, I was playing for him in the hospital, and he started singing with me like long after he had spoken his last words. I just have a really big respect for music as like an entity that we don't fully understand, I think, and sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the trappings of like commercial success or whatever it is, or perfection or talent or whatever, and I really, really think it's not almost at all about those things, even though we appreciate them, right? But to equate it with just that is really selling it short.
Yeah, I have kids who take music lessons, and so I'm gonna take some of what I learned from your book and kind of chill out on the practice charts for a little bit.
Yeah. I know I was like, is this controversial? I don't know, but I do feel pretty strongly about that, like not making it a battle between a parent and a kid
Hmm.
about practicing just because it can do a lot of damage later in life. I've seen. I mean, I'm sure it works for some kids. Again, I'm not here to prescribe for everyone, but in my experience, having it be just a fun form of play is a really it's been a huge part of my life anyways, that way.
Yeah. So I learned a lot about the Americans with Disabilities Act in reading this book. I'm a little bit older than you, and it
Okay.
kind of shocked me to find out that it was passed in 1990. To me, that's not very long ago.
No.
So, super brief overview for listeners. It's the law that's supposed to protect people with disabilities, but it's an unfunded mandate. So, you, Galen, often perform at venues where businesses are not ADA compliant because improving accessibility is expensive. You write that a solution for this disconnect between what's required by law and what's actually provided in real life is for the government to fund the ADA. And what do you think is the best way for folks to advocate for this?
You know, since this is a Minnesota specific podcast, I will say that something that's like kind of right now, unfortunately, on my back burner because there's just a lot of other things going on, but something I really care about and I think eventually could happen in Minnesota specifically is Senator Jen McEwen, who is a really cool state senator from my area. She's been talking with me about making a grant that independent venues, so not necessarily places like First Avenue, but smaller places, or maybe First, but not like the Target Center. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Smaller places could apply for grant funding, but it could only be used for accessibility. So it would be like you couldn't say, well, we need new windows for energy efficiency. That wouldn't cut it. It would have to be for accessibility. And a grant program like that would be cool because there are already tax incentives to becoming ADA compliant. And so people can already write it off, and it's clearly not a big enough incentive, unfortunately. And so that's like a huge thing is advocating for things like creating programs that don't yet exist but could exist, especially on a state level, because if that were to pass in the future, that could be replicated in all the other states or any other state that wanted to try it. So I think that's a really cool idea. And at first I felt hesitant even bringing it up to her, and she's like, "You have no idea, like when Essentia Health builds in Duluth, we give them millions and millions of dollars. Like, this is not outrageous to say that we set aside some tax money to make things more accessible. So I think that that's pretty cool. I mean, I'm really hoping that someday that can be something we start here because Minnesota's a cool state in that way that we've done some things. And then the other thing, of course, is it's a, partly it's a demand issue. Like if customers who aren't disabled themselves start noticing that the places they're going don't have an accessible bathroom, for example, they can start speaking up because it is at this point, I think of it as discrimination, to be honest, when a place like that doesn't have. I know that most venues don't think of it that way, but it is a civil rights law. The ADA is a civil rights law. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're choosing to ignore it 35 years later, it's not a new law. It's a very long-standing law. If you're choosing not to ever prioritize any of your budget towards widening a bathroom door or getting a taller toilet, which are not like $1 million renovations,
Mm-hmm.
then I think we have to start talking about what mentally is happening in the minds of the business owners, and perhaps they are not being honest with themselves about what's going on, which is basically, in a practical sense, you're discriminating against people who want to access your business, but also happen to have a disability. So it's kind of twofold. I think it's up to us to really push. It's up to business owners to take responsibility, but then there's creative political solutions too that I have a lot of hope for in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Those are very specific and actionable.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
appreciate that.
yeah.
So I want to ask you about your writing process because you are a songwriter and a book author. So how do you approach writing song lyrics and prose? Are they similar to you? Do you do them differently?
I have done writing in the past as like essays, but this is the first big writing project that I've ever done, and I was pleasantly surprised that there is some overlap with like how it feels to write song lyrics. Now, in full disclosure, when I write songs, they always start in the shower, and they come to me kind of half formed. Like it'll usually be the lyrics and the words, or the lyrics and the music. I hear them simultaneously. They're almost always attached already. It's not like I'm adding a melody. But they're not usually very long. It's like one or two lines, and then I gotta kind of keep adding to it. And that's how I write songs. It almost always starts with some sort of spontaneous, um, like download of some kind of line that comes. And so pretty much always. And so then when it comes to writing the book or whatever, that obviously was a little more planned out. Like I had a big, huge book outline. I had thought a lot about what I wanted to say, but still there's these moments of like, oh, I could start with this story, or oh, I could word it this way. Um, that does feel spontaneous still, which was kind of surprising. I didn't know if any of the book would feel like that. For example, the way I ended the book with a phone call from Judy Human, which was very emotional for me to write about. That came to me like when I was sitting in a chair and I just got goosebumps. And I was like, because I had kind of wondered how am I going to end the book. I had tried a couple other endings that didn't feel really right, like in the theater at Macbeth, and it was like fine, but it just wasn't the right tone, and so I do think there's still some like divine intervention that happens when you're writing a book, even if there's a lot more. There's definitely more like I'm sitting down and I'm writing a thing, and I'm gonna do this for an hour, and you really have to just get into the flow and force that kind of. I think, at least in my experience, it was like a more concerted effort, but then there are still magical moments, and it was pretty fun. I mean, and then there's editing. I mean, like song editing is a thing. I mean, you often change out
Hmm.
words and stuff, but if you don't do it 25,000 times and then like have it take months and months and months. So like it's just such a bigger project. The book was the biggest, definitely the most like labor intensive project I've done so far.
Yeah, I was wondering because when you're writing the song lyrics, obviously you then perform them. Do you read your prose out loud to like hear it? Is that important to your revision process?
It's interesting that you say that. I am an auditory reader, like I hear a voice in my head, and it was really important to me that it read like I would sound if I was talking. And so it was really fun to read the audiobook because although sometimes I chose vocab words that were harder to say than I expected out loud, but like in general, I wanted it to have a ring. Like I wanted the sentences to feel intentional and have like a ring. And so I think because I'm a songwriter, that's one kind of surprise crossover thing that happened is that I did care about how the sentences sounded out loud, even as I was writing them. I didn't read them out loud, but I read them in my head and like would change them until they felt more lyrical, I guess, if that makes any sense. That's sort of how I thought about it while I was writing.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me about the audiobook.
So I narrated the audiobook myself, which was a cool and long process, but I'm glad that I did it. It was fun to be able to read the sentences the way I really intended them on the page. But the fun part about the audiobook, which I didn't think of, this was the publisher, is they have a ton of my music in there. So
Oh,
there's a
cool.
lot of chapter transitions, and then anytime I mention lyrics, I sing the lyrics. So it's a very different experience, I think, for the listener than it will be for the reader because you'll actually get to hear the melodies attached to all the lyrics and stuff. So I'm excited for it to come out. I'm personally not an audiobook listener. Like I prefer reading, and so I didn't really give it much thought until I heard the finished product and they did a really, really good job putting it together. So I'm excited for people to have access to that too.
That sounds great because there is a lot of music in the book. That would be great to
Mm-hmm.
listen to
Yeah,
it
there's
as
I
you
mean, and
hear
they
it.
all match up. Like I got, and that was the maybe the funnest part for me is they let me go through the book and put the cues I wanted in there when I wanted them. And so, I mean, they had to say to like veto something, but I think they actually did just pretty much do the stuff because I know my catalog the best, and so I found songs that really fit, I think, with the moment and the sometimes it's the song that you're talking about and sometimes it's a different thing. But it went in order kind of on accident from like the earlier part of my catalog all the way through to the end with Macbeth. And so it was pretty fun. I mean, it was a cool project. I'm super excited that they're both going to be out at the same time. So we'll see what happens. Who knows?
Well, I love reading memoirs and personal essays. I loved this one.
Yay.
And I have a lot to compare your book to. Was reminded of Alice Wong's writing about disability and activism. I was reminded of Greg Marshall has a great essay collection called Leg. I thought your writing is warm, conversational, upbeat. It also made me
Oh.
think of like Brandy Carlisle's Broken Horses,
Oh.
that music memoir. Do you like reading memoirs yourself? Did you read any memoirs as you were writing this to like look for models of how to structure it?
I do really like memoirs myself, and I've read, quite a few throughout the years, but it's not like the only thing I read, obviously. But when I was writing, I did make a point to read a few, and one that stuck with me in a surprising way, because it's not a very comparable read, I don't think, but I read Alexei Navalny's memoir, Patriots, and I will say that I got the idea of starting the book with the tiny desk from reading his memoir because he started his memoir being poisoned, which again, very different memoirs, but it's like everybody already knew that about him. That was the one thing that you would know going into the
Hmm.
book. So I loved the idea of covering that first so that the rest of the book felt new. Because I was struggling with where to put that chapter about winning the tiny desk because that is, if you were going to know me, not everybody will, obviously, but if you were going to know me, that's why you would know me. And I didn't really want to wait 25 chapters to get to it because I think it would have felt kind of anticlimactic. So I put it right at the beginning because of that. Like I saw it done and I was like, aha, he has figured it out. This is the way to go. So I did that. And then I read, like Judy Heuman's memoir. I read Chloe Cooper Jones's memoir, Easy Beauty. That was really good. Trying to think, I read a few more. Of course, I read Alice Wong's Life of the Tiger, or Year of the Tiger, I believe it's called. Trying to think who else I read though. But I did. I read a few mostly after the initial writing. I didn't read a lot while I was writing, except for the Navalny one, because I never even thought that would. I mean, I wasn't thinking, oh, this will be very similar to mine, but it ended up being good that I did read it because it was super useful for that. So I don't know. Yeah, I think reading nonfiction in general. Oh, I read Ben Franklin's memoir, which
Oh,
again, he's old, but it was amazing and I loved it. And I loved how he created a scene and brought you back in time. And I think that stuck with me too, is like, how do you make it? Like, I wanted people to see Duluth. Like, I wanted them to see Lake Superior. He was really good at making it visual for you. And it wasn't an era that you're familiar with. So you have to kind of explain it well enough so that somebody can put themselves in the scene. I don't think I'm as good a writer as Ben Franklin probably, but like it was a fun it was a good example of how to put people in the world with you.
hmm.
Yeah, so I don't know. There's probably other ones that I read, but those are the ones that come to mind. Oh, I read Crying in H Mart for this, like for the editing phase. I don't know. There's quite a few. There's fun.
That's
And
a
I'm gonna
great
try to
eclectic
find them.
list.
Yeah, yeah, kind of random. Ben Franklin, Navalny, Crying in H Mart. I don't know. Oh, Nico Cases. Yeah, that was the other one. I think those are all the ones I read.
Okay, nice.
hmm
Who is your favorite Minnesota writer?
My favorite Minnesota writer is Kevin Kling. Um,
Oh,
he's,
yeah.
he's known as a storyteller, but he also writes, which is not the same thing. Like he writes out his stories in essay form too for books, and as he'll tell you, because he's a friend of mine, it's just like it's a different process, the oral tradition and the written tradition. So he has to kind of rework the stories for the page. But I just think he is so creative and open-hearted, and he writes about disability in a way um, that I relate to, but also makes you laugh. And he's just a really cool. He's a cool guy. So and then Matthew Sanford. I also read his memoir. I don't think maybe he considers himself like a full-time writer. I think maybe it's the only book he's written, but it's called Waking. He's a disabled yoga instructor in Minneapolis, and his memoir is amazing. So if you haven't read it, I would recommend it.
Okay, I don't know that one, so I'll definitely look that
hmm
up.
It's really good.
Do you have a favorite Minnesota songwriter?
Oh man.
Or is that putting you two on the spot? You've probably got a lot of friends
Yeah, I was
in the
like,
business.
I mean, favorite Minnesota songwriter, I don't know. I think the one that impacted, well, besides Alan Sparhawk in terms of impact, but the person I like gravitated towards the most in my formative years was Charlie Parr.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
he played in Duluth like every Wednesday at Fickers, and I would go and dance, and as he's developed as a songwriter, he's gotten more personal, I think, and like I just really like everything he does. So I guess I would have to say Charlie Parr probably.
Oh, that's a good one too.
Yeah, he's awesome. Although there's a lot of really good songwriters here, so I hate to even answer that question. But in terms of people, for me personally, Charlie Parr is where it's at.
So you have probably a lot of events coming up. Where can folks follow you online and find out about readings and performances?
Yeah, well, I have a website, violinscratches.com, like a cat scratch. I probably should have picked an easier website name, but that's not what I did. So violinscratches.com, and then, social media, Gaelynn Lea, just my name, on most platforms. And then I will be in Minneapolis on the 30th of April for a book release show at Open Eye Theater. And I'm really excited because Matthew Samford and Nikki Villavicencio, who is a disability advocate in your area, they'll be joining me for a conversation. And then I'm going to play like 6 or 7 songs, then do a book signing afterwards. So that'll be fun. And just yeah, and then I have a mailing list and a Substack. And I send out probably like once a month. I send out a post, kind of a newsletter thing with some reflections, sometimes about creativity, sometimes about disability, and then just sometimes what I'm up to. That's galenlee.substack.com.
Awesome. Thank you. I will link to all of those in the show notes so listeners can find them there.
Awesome.
Well, thank
Cool.
you so much. Those are all of my questions. I really appreciate you speaking with me today about your book.
I'm super excited. Thank you very much for having me and hope to meet you in person sometime.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.